Hello and welcome to Geekarati.
For geeks, by geeks, and with geeks.
Life below the earth.
Welcome to Overtime.
Brave enough to do battle with hideous monsters.
I am Sinistar.
Hello and welcome to Geekarati. This is Christian Lindke. I'm joined by guest Matt Thompson this week for our Geek Side chat. He is the writer and publisher of Critical Hit Parader. It's a Substack that focuses on the interconnection of role-playing games and rock music, and I think a little bit more. I think some fiction goes in there sometimes, and certainly Matt has a really deep knowledge of music and talks about a lot of great artists that I'm a big fan of. In addition to his Substack, Matt had created a zine for the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game, which was a successful Kickstarter in 2023, I think. And it's one of the few DCC zines I don't own, so now I'm going to have to go back and add it to my large pile of zines for that game, which I just think is fantastic. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I feel like I know you from reading all of your Substack articles, but this is actually the first time that we've had a chance to talk, so I'm really thrilled to get to do it. I'm a fan of your work, and I'm blushing from the nice introduction that you gave me. So, really excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you too. I mean, I created my Substack a couple years ago in order to do exactly kind of what I've been doing the past couple weeks, which is to talk with people that have similar or overlapping interests and to create a sense of community. I think that what's great about Substack and makes it different from Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and everything else is, while we do have some people who use Substack to do the kind of political content or whatever, more of it focuses on kind of artistic creation, memoir, and personal experiences. And it reminds me of the old blogosphere, or whatever you want to call it, back in the mid 2008, when I did my original podcast and blog. And it's just a great way to do community and leverages the positive aspects of the internet rather than so many of the kind of negative aspects which make us angry all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of the things I appreciate about your newsletter is that it is positive, right? Like I like how you can provide some critique from an academic standpoint, but it's not the rage baiting things to just get a rise. Like I think you're always trying to find the positive in things, and that's how I try to approach the Critical Hit Parader. I'm only covering things I'm excited about. Life's too short to cover things that I don't enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much entertainment and so much content, so much literature, music, movies, television, games, whatever, that are worth experiencing that you'll never experience them in your life. You don't have enough time for all the good stuff. Why spend time griping about the bad? I mean, you're going to encounter it, but just move on.
Yeah, exactly. So we seem to be of a similar mindset, and glad to get a chance to talk.
Yeah, so, obviously, I always include a bit of music in my supposed to be weekly geekly rundowns. They usually end up about 3 a month, I think. And this was Halloween, and I included some Halloween songs this time. Obviously, Misfits, Halloween, and some other stuff. But what are some of your recommendations for maybe Halloween theme music or things you want to talk about jumping off on Halloween theme music?
Yeah, well, I loved your three choices. So you had Blue Oyster Cult, you had Misfits, and you had Electric Frankenstein, right? And in there, and I actually wanted to share with you. I have a weird Electric Frankenstein anecdote, which is that when I was in my especially when I was in my 20s, I was very much into martial arts. I wanted to be have my own martial arts school, and I still I'm interested, and so wherever I've lived, I've always kept an eye on locally things that were going on in terms of martial arts, and I was interested in the internal Chinese martial arts like Bagua and singing, things like that. And so I a local store to us that is, I guess you would call it sort of a new agey type bookstore and crystal store and things like that. They do classes, and they were doing a qigong class, and I had anytime I see one of those things, I always check it out and check out the instructors. And it was not sure how to say his last name, but it was Sal Canzaneri, the guitar, I think I'm saying right, the guitarist from Electric Frankenstein, and he was big into martial arts, and he's done a lot of teaching of that. And I was like, oh, I totally am signing up for that, because then I can get to ask him questions about punk rock in the '90s. And unfortunately, the owner of the store then told me that they had to cancel because he was getting back into the music side of things, so he didn't have time to do that anymore.
Yeah, it was. In fact, it was in the '90s, late '90s. I went to, I was finishing undergrad, and a buddy of mine, Ian, he takes me to this show in the Bay Area. It's in I think it's the Fillmore West, but I'd always heard it was closed, but I think it was open, and it was arranged by Jello Biafra. It was like this mix of
Oh, very
bands.
cool.
Yeah, it was this really interesting event. And I went to go see Dwarves because, they were kind of like, I was in college, super edgy, right? I want the edgy band. But I also knew that we would probably watch more of Dwarves after the show at some dive bar, because they just, at big shows, they just go, they like play a couple minutes, and then they're just like, yeah, we're done. So I was expecting that. And there were a couple other bands there too that I liked. But then there was, Electric Frankenstein shows up, and I'm like, oh, I've never even heard of Electric Frankenstein, right? And they just start playing, and it's just this. It had like punk vibrancy, but it was just straight classic rock and roll, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never, this was what I came to hear, and it just blew my mind. And I became a huge fan. The only other experience I had that like blew my mind was when I went to there was a really small bar in Reno when I was an undergrad, and we saw the Dickies with like
Oh,
10 other
really?
people. Yeah, they were touring at the time with the Offspring, but I'm pretty sure we were like we need to be able to afford gasoline to get to the Bay Area stop.
Yeah.
And they just stopped at this like really small bar, and they played forever. And I I mean, I had other CDs, but I bought a CD directly from them, which was a collection of songs that I'm pretty sure they just burned on their like CD that they were selling
CDR.
their own
Yeah.
bootleg. Yeah, they were selling their own bootleg. I was like, well, it's not piracy if you're buying it from the actual artist.
That's right. That's right. Whether there's a
You
label
know,
involved or not, it's more direct for
right?
them. That's very cool that you got to see them in such a small
Yeah,
setting.
yeah. It was really neat, and that was like it was right after or toward the end of the Lollapalooza stuff, when you had like the kind of freak show stuff going on as well. So there was a bit of that beforehand with the
Okay.
kind of carny freak stuff going on from a show. I can't remember which one. I'd actually have to look it up. That was just a great time though, and they just the concert for that, for the intimacy and the quality, for the kind of small crowd that they had, you really get a sense as to why punk connects so well with so many people as a music, right? Not only is it DIY, but you know, it's very much they perform when there are only 10 people there, or 20 people there, and don't begrudge it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that gives you such a unique memory, right? Like of
Yeah.
it really feels like that was the only time that that event happened. It's not like a tour where they're playing every the stage setup and the songs and everything is going to be very professional, but exactly the same no matter which city you saw it in. This was a unique event.
Yeah, and those kinds of things happen. I mean, that's really why we like music too, right? We always connect with the musicians even if we're just listening to the albums, right? We just find some way to connect with it. And that's why I think like having role-playing games and music is such an interesting connection, because I don't know how old I was when I was like, wait a minute, are Led Zeppelin talking about J.R.R. Tolkien? Like, I think they are. Like, I don't remember what age I was, probably like 11 or 12, but the connection between fantasy and, I guess, first heavy metal, and then heavy metal influencing later fantasy became like something that I realized was happening, that was a dialogue.
Yeah, and I had a similar journey, right? And as you first start to discover, I guess if for me, and it sounds like maybe for you, like if you're kind of having your fantasy interests in literature and role playing games evolving kind of at the same time as your music interests, and then when you see those first connections and see that, if you catch the same mortar in a Led Zeppelin song, or um, like Rush and Rivendell or something like that, and then you say, "Oh my goodness, these worlds intersect." Because my I at some points in my life as I was growing up, it those the my gaming the gaming community, or the fantasy sci-fi loving community, was different than the especially for the heavy metal hard rock community. But I was very comfortable in both of those, and I was happy to kind of float between them. But it was very exciting when kind of with the and I was a pretty straight edge kid, right? But I would hang out with a lot of the stoners because we had the common music interests, and um, me being able to geek out on some of the lyrics of the bands that they loved gave me a little bit of, I think, cred with that group. And it was just so exciting when they intersect. And you put Blue Oyster Cult in as one of your suggestions, the song Astronomy. And that was definitely a band that was the blowing my mind part of the world intersecting. And you've written about Michael Moorcock a lot. I've written about him a lot. Where to me he's the patron saint of critical hit parader, right? Because he has sort of you can't argue with his credentials, both on the music side and on the influencing, D&D, of course, as a Appendix N author, and then having written lyrics for Hawkwind and Blue Oyster Cult, and having his own music with the Deep Fix. And it's just, no one else has put such a stamp to me as being right in between, even more than Tolkien, um, for this intersection of role playing games and music.
Yeah, Michael Moorcock blows my mind. He was, and I've mentioned this many, many times before. Most kids have as their introduction to fantasy, right? Once they're going beyond like the Greek myths or Norse myths, which of course I read before I read Michael Moorcock, but like my friends, when they were introduced to fantasy, most of them, they started with Tolkien, or they started with C.S. Lewis, or Madeline L'Engle, right? That they were with these like childhood, age appropriate, though often with very sophisticated language, very sophisticated, deeper meaning, but still kind of, I would say, more age appropriate. But my real introduction to fantasy as a literature came in middle school. I had befriended a kid who came from Chicago. He'd already read Tolkien and stuff. I hadn't really, but he introduced me to Michael Moorcock first through the Hawkmoon series, right? So I'm reading these books and I'm like, wow, these are really good. And we ended up having like this competition for like who would find the more obscure Michael Moorcock stories. And next thing you know, I'm reading Behold the Man when I'm like 13 years old, and
Oh wow.
wondering like what my parents would think if they found out that I was, reading this book. And became a huge fan. And I am, as you can see, behind me, I've got the 6 Michael Whelan covers for the Elric saga, the original core 6 books of the Elric saga, at least as I understand them. They actually were of course, short stories published in science fiction magazines even before either one of us was born. But, you know, I came at fantasy fiction from somebody who was deconstructing the medium and engaging with it, not in a negative way. It's clear he's like, I mean, Elric is an anti Conan, but he's an anti Conan written by somebody who loves Conan, right?
Right.
So it's engaging with kind of the same ideas from a different perspective, and but I came at it from that. So like when I read the Pollyanna-ish super happy stuff, I'm like, oh wow, this is so cutting edge. How ironic! The hero wins. Like I'm used to this. This is novel. I'm used to suffering at the end of my stories.
Right, right. Oh, that's so funny.
Oh, how brave of the author.
To allow
Uh,
allow them to live and win.
right, yeah, but like the quorum stuff, because we talk about Michael Moorcock and Blue Öyster Cult, right? The I remember I was at my friend Sean's place, and like Veteran of the Psychic Wars came on, and I'm like, hey, wait, like, and my friend Sean's older brothers who were, you know, older Gen X, kind of the stoner generation that's in, what's the Matthew McConaughey, Dazed and Confused, right?
Yeah.
They're very much of that kind of vibe and personality, and they're watching it, and they're like, and I'm like, wait a minute, those lyrics seem to be referring to like this book that I'm reading, and then it turns out that they were like big, not Moorcock fans, but big fantasy fans, and they're the ones who introduced me to D&D, me and Sean to the Dungeons and Dragons after that.
Oh, okay. Oh, so there's really a connection then between the music and the role playing games with your
Yeah, for me,
with your
yeah.
group. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's neat. Mine was a bit more traditional. So I did start with Narnia and Tolkien in elementary school, but my mom worked at a library, a public library, and so I basically grew up at a library, and the kids of the librarians all hung out together, and there was a good number that were older than me, so I got a lot of music influence from that group, as well as they had pretty hip selection of not just albums but of books. So that library did had the Elric books, so had Moorcock, had Fritz Leiber, had the Fafford and Gray Mauser books. Did not have Conan. So I came later to Robert E. Howard, but I was reading Leiber and Moorcock in middle school, and around the same time that I heard, Black Blade had just come out for Blue
Oh,
Öyster
sure,
Cult in
yeah.
1980, and that was the second of the three Michael Moorcock written lyrics for them. Uh, and then, of course, Veteran of the Psychic Wars was the next year, and that showed up in the heavy metal soundtrack for the heavy metal animated movie, and that just brought everything together for me, all my loves at once.
Yeah, and those are such great songs too. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is it's not just that Michael Moorcock is a good lyrical writer who can write kind of sparse prose that evokes so much beyond it. Because like when you're reading the Elric stories, let's say, there's a depth of world building that's there, yet the stories are short, or even when they're a novel, they're less than 300 pages, but they're rich and deep.
For sure. And I think Blue Oyster Cult's a good interpreter for that
Mm.
kind of music. So Eric Bloom was a Michael Moorcock fan, so he had written the fan letter, and that was how they got to Michael Moorcock, and that's how they got connected. And they didn't collaborate in the same room. He sent them lyrics, and that's how they collaborated with outside lyricists throughout their career. They weren't sitting in the same room. So even Sandy Pearlman, who wrote all the Imaginos lyrics, of which Astronomy is one, he just had his reams of paper of poems for his soft doctrine of Imaginos epic poetry cycle, and they would take those and then really work them into songs. So for Astronomy, Joe Bouchard, I believe from Blue Oyster Cult, had done a lot of the moving around because it wasn't workable, the lyrics as written as a song, so they would make the adjustments. And I suspect they probably did a similar thing with what they received from Michael Moorcock, and took some creative liberties to move things around or order them in a certain way to fit the music that they were putting together.
Yeah, so certainly while these musics like heavy metal or prog rock and fantasy fit together for us, right, as fans, why do you think they fit together so well for the musicians themselves, right? The artists.
Yeah, so I mean, in the early days, it seems like, I guess, well, early days meaning early days of like prog rock and hard rock. So the late 60s, early 70s time period. So your Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath type of thing. That you had a few things. So you did have the Tolkien boom of that time, right, around colleges. Kind of similarly, like there were some Marvel comics on college booming going around at that time. So I think some of it was just of that generation and being interested, and they were lyricists because their songs needed words, right? We're still in the kind of the early days of bands writing their own music. It's not that long into the history, and they need something to write about, and so they're reading. So Geezer Butler, who did a lot of the majority of the lyrics for the first generation of Black Sabbath, the Ozzy years of Black Sabbath, he's not super thoughtful about why he wrote about those, the horror stuff or the song The Wizard. He was reading Lord of the Rings at the time, and so he threw some wizard things in for Gandalf, but it's not like a real retelling in any fashion about Tolkien. It was just enough of a spark to make a song about it. Led Zeppelin, having sort of the occult interests that Jimmy Page primarily, and he was not the lyricist. Robert Plant was doing the lyrics, but Robert Plant was, he talks about what he calls the Shire is just the in general countryside, but the Welsh countryside for him. That's just sort of inspirational. That deep folk and mythical landscape, and for him, the Misty Mountains were in Wales, not in Middle Earth necessarily, but he, again, had read the books, and for a period of time in his life that didn't really carry forward, it was enough to spark his things. But again, none of those songs, even the ones with the most references, they're really not. Battle of Evermore is the most really Tolkienish thing. I don't know. Ramble On might have a little bit more actual references, but Ramble On really is not like a Tolkien song. It's just got some references, especially in that last verse.
I think that's kind of what's neat is we spend a lot of time like in geek culture making sure that all of our references or the lore or whatever is spot on, right? Then we get highly critical if anybody varies from established canon. And yet a lot of the earliest music stuff that I really connect with and a lot of people connect with, right, is just like lifting stuff and like that's inspiring and great, but they're just like, oh, wouldn't this be great to just include in here because it's cool? And I wish we had a lot more of that in our conversations today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when I think about it, and I'm the where we've got like role playing games that are directly influenced by music, and I've done it. I did it with my zine, but um, I think it probably works best when you're not as tied to the literal thing that you're inspired by. When you just take the initial spark and then truly make it your own, and then that's probably going to be a more interesting thing than a real literal matching of
Yeah, I
the
mean,
source material in the game.
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like maybe comparing, let's say, the first two editions of Vampire the Masquerade, which are like heavily influenced by gothic music and horror punk, maybe a little bit, and some techno music, early techno music, versus let's say and I don't mean to criticize it, 'cause I own actually both editions of the game, so I'm not panning the game as a game. I'm just saying it isn't connecting with as broad an audience, and that's like the Star Children game, which is essentially like, the game of glam rock, and
Mm.
turning glam rock into direct fiction rather than being a part of the ambience of the world that's there.
Right. And yeah, and there's been a lot of indie games lately where um, you're in a band, right? You're playing somebody in a band, and it's kind of interesting to see how that goes. That personally doesn't interest me because I was in bands, so my need to role play that isn't interesting to me. But I love reading those and
Right.
seeing how they treat it. And there's been some really, I think, very interesting takes on that, which is I guess a different way of broadening out the role playing game music connection.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, there's so much out there right now in the role-playing game space. I can't actually keep track of it anymore. It's very difficult to do.
Yeah, I definitely feel your pain there. There's for one of the things I try to do with Critical Hit Parader is I just try to promote any if there's a music connection at all to a role playing game, I want to promote it in there because
Right.
somebody might be interested and not know about it. We have a curation challenge, right? There's so much stuff both in music and in role playing games. There's way more great stuff than I'll ever get a chance to listen to or to play. And so I try to help find those things, but it is difficult for me to keep up. And now what we're getting is they're unlike those early bands where they're not influenced, of course, they're not influenced by role playing games at all. They're influenced by the authors who influence role playing games. But now there's lots of current bands who are directly influenced by the role playing games that the members of the band are playing, and so trying to keep up with trying to keep up with all of those is challenging. But there's great stuff, and it's all different types of music. It's not all it is heavy metal does tend to be the most common genre, but there's punk, there's post punk, there's acoustic music. Like there really is a variety.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Weezer, of course, right within the garage for the
Yeah.
post-punk. There have even been like humorous stuff. Like the Roll a D6 song that was done a while back, and there's a lot. It's funny because like when I go to science fiction conventions or whatever, comic book conventions, I'm not the biggest fan of folk singing in general, right? As a concept, because I'm always like, eh. But there's a whole class of people on YouTube, TikTok, etc., who are I don't want to call it elevated folk singing, but they're just good at it, maybe.
Mm,
And when you go to a convention, there's no guarantee that the group you're with is going to be good at it. Where they're singing songs that are either about playing D&D or playing role-playing games, or there's one I think called the DM's Lament that was done by a young woman in Los Angeles about a decade ago who's built her career as like a professional DM, but also as a comedian who does humorous songs about role playing
mm.
experiences and stuff. And there's a lot of that's there too, which I think is really interesting that you have this feedback loop or conversation going on in between music and role playing games, just as you do in fantasy literature and role playing games, to the point where I I think this is just my opinion. I think a lot of the kind of critiques that a lot of people have about the most recent version of Dungeons and Dragons, where they see like every race known to man or every combination known to man thrown in, is less about culture war stuff, although certainly there's a ton of culture war stuff involved in all of that. I think a lot of it is the fact that, D&D started inspired by literature, right? And it had like Appendix N, which you've mentioned, right? It's got this list of books from which, Gary Gygax intentionally leaves out Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. But come on, we have elves and halflings and dwarves. We know what's going on here.
Yeah, and we had Hobbit right in the original D&D
Right?
until like
Yeah,
until
you
we
didn't
didn't.
even. Yeah, we had the Hobbit until we didn't. Right in there, in the rule book, so we know what's going on. But you have that influence, but then people start writing fiction based on D&D, and then the next wave of D&D is inspired by the fiction written about D&D, which then inspires more fiction about D&D. So you now have a lot of the modern game is inspired by some of the really I'll call it whimsical, because it just, or patchwork, it just combines so much literature of even like the early 2000s or late 90s, with some additional writers like Brandon Sanderson, etc., influencing it. But I remember, and I guess this has to be the early 2000s, there was the White Plume Mountain series of books by Polly Kemp. And in those, it starts very like straightforward. It's a ranger who's wandering through the wilderness, who all of a sudden like gets a pixie companion, and then a sphinx companion, all of which, by the way, are, I think, possible in the regular AD&D player's handbook. But your adventuring party now is the ranger with his mystic fairyland set of companions. The books themselves are pretty sword and sorcery-esque, pretty, not quite grimdark, but a little grimmer, darker.
Yeah.
But I could see, if those are like some of the first fantasy novels you've read, which it has to be for somebody, right? For somebody, this is their first fantasy novels or early, that then that's the kind of D&D you want to play. And then you've got anime and so many other influences.
Yeah.
And D&D's just trying to be basic and, like cover everything. And that's hard to do. I don't know that they should do that in the player's handbook necessarily. Maybe use that for splat books or something. But you always run it, it's just a big challenge. And I do not envy the people who try and balance the old audience. And I count myself among them. I want traditional fantasy. I want traditional sword and sorcery. I had to spend, I don't know how many weeks begging my players not to play gnomes in my setting. I said there are no gnomes because gnomes are evil. They're fey, and all of the fey are evil, and they're except for elves, and half of them are evil. They're red caps. They're just awful. You don't want them in your life. And they're like, but I want to be the one that isn't. I'm like, but everybody's human. But I want to be the one who isn't. I'm like, and I lost, right? Because as a GM, you have to go. You want your players to play, so
Right.
they have to play things that are interesting to them. And it's why I'm constantly emphasizing being a DM isn't being an author. Because if I was an author, well, they're all villains. But I'm playing with people, so it's collaborative. And the stories that came out of those game sessions are very different than what I would have written or would write in the setting that I've created as fantasy fiction.
Yeah, and that is what makes role-playing games so unique, right? Like, and that's the magic when it happens, and why there's, for me, right, no other form of entertainment that gives me that same sort of feeling as when you have those really, when something was created that no one of you could have done on your own. I mean, there's a little bit like that in music to me. So, right, like it's the difference. It's when you create something as a band versus just writing the whole song and presenting it to the band, and or if you have like this some sort of great improvisational thing happening as you're jamming. But the you it requires. I mean, I know this is the big discourse all the time on online in general, but if the table's compatible with each other, it's all good, right? And whatever, I'm up to play anything, right? I'd be happy to play some whatever people want to play.
Yeah, I've had so many frustrations just trying to schedule games, right? And had people cancel all the time because of busy lives, etc. That if I'm able to get people together to play Monopoly, I don't, this is why I'm not even hating on Monopoly. If I get to
Yeah.
play a game I'm good because it's hard sometimes to get people together, and I'm not gonna put anything in the way of that. I want to feed off of your thing about like in music, and I was thinking about this as you were talking that when you said improvisation, and I think role playing games are the nearest equivalent in kind of ludic environments, right? Play environments to jazz. They're a kind of jazz.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe you know, so maybe some of it is blues, right? Where you've got a very structured format, but then within that, you get to do a lot of improvisation. And maybe some of it is more jazz, like where the structure itself is not there, is more free form. So maybe there's a difference of play styles that we could make different analogies to different
Yeah,
forms of
right.
music.
And yeah, and I think where some of the critics maybe spend too much time criticizing is that whether you're playing, let's say, something like you know Whiplash or Caravan for jazz, which is fairly structured but has room for freeform in it, versus maybe some crazy jazz fusion thing from the early 1980s, which I personally find almost dissonant, but which has a place and has a huge fan base. That all of those musicians, right? They know the basics of jazz. They know like the classic things. They could all start back at some root if they needed to adapt to whatever. That maybe some of these people who are super angry, instead of spending time being angry about the modern thing, praise the thing that you loved in the beginning. Give them those foundational standards, right? I think that's the proper term from jazz, right? What's the standard? And just say this is Robert E. Howard's Conan, which is one standard, and that's great. And then there are weird people like Christian who's going to say, oh, by the way, maybe you want to read some Sprague de Camp Conan too, because it's different, and you may not like it because it's jazz fusion and maybe
Right.
weird
And
jazz
you're
fusion, but I like it, kind of thing, right? And just give them reference points that they won't abandon what they're doing, but they might grow into something with you, in a dialogue.
right, right. And there's probably, similar, you could profile music fans and RPG fans similarly in that you've got some fans of music, right, who listen to all different genres, and it's more about how it's done within a particular genre. Like they've got favorite artists, but they're not just listening to all one kind of thing. And then you've got other fans who are really fans of a genre, right? And they're going to listen to whatever that particular type of music that is their favorite genre, and they'll get really deep, and they know all the bands that are within that. And maybe there's similar things. Both, I guess, RPGs, both in maybe play style, right, as well as the type of superhero games versus fantasy games versus
Yeah,
sci-fi or something like that.
and certainly I don't want what I just said to be interpreted or for people to think I mean that if they want that more structured play experience, right, that's wrong. I actually don't think that. I think that if you want to play straight sword and sorcery D&D, then you should do that. You'll get the most out of it. But if you instead of my point is just instead of getting mad at people for not doing that, maybe show them what's so great about it. And they'll probably still play they'll probably still play Daggerheart or whatever, but they'll also come back and they'll go, oh, but I want to do this other thing too.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I
this
mean,
I
ultimately. Okay, sorry, Christian.
no, go ahead.
I was just like the best thing you can do is just run a great game, right? If you want to attract people to the game you want to play, and just give them the best possible experience you can. And if maybe they'll do it, and if not, you at least had probably maximize the fun at the table for that particular session.
I just remember like my dad used to play like a lot of Steely Dan in the house, right? And that's very jazz influenced rock and roll. And so, like, I loved it. I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. And he said, well, and so then some people that I knew I met in college are like, oh, well, then you really like jazz. I'm like, okay. And then, sure, I'll listen to some. And then they started playing, some of the weirder, more progressive jazz that, as I said, it's a little dissonant to me. It's not ordered. It doesn't have, to me, I know that there are recognizable structures, but to me, there's no recognizable structure at any given moment. They're playing with the instability of sound and things like that. And like, oh, I don't think I like jazz. And then somebody plays, well, what about some Dave Brubeck? And I'm like, okay, that's bringing it back, and then going to like the big band stuff. And that was the stuff, like big band music was huge when I was an undergrad, right? That was,
Mm.
the time when swing dance, and I did that. It was like when swing dancing was big, and I'm like, oh wait, this is
Right.
jazz. This is fantastic. And all of those things are jazz, but they're all very different and not going to be to everybody's taste.
Yeah, for sure. I do love Steely Dan, so and that's definitely one of my favorite bands, and it was jazz musicians playing rock, right? Like it's legitimate. They all were legitimate jazz players, realizing the vision of the two Steely Dan members.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. It's just you end up with just some wonderful music that is timeless, but is playing around with ideas. And I just want to spend more time playing around with ideas than critiquing them. And yet I'm spending time critiquing things at the moment. But so I mean, I even brought stuff to like share, like, because like I was like, oh wow, yeah, like the intersection of heavy metal and literature and role playing games, right? The DMR
Oh yeah,
books,
I've
right?
got a couple of those over here.
And they're great. That's like you have this like heavy metal musician who has created, in my opinion, like one of the best publishing houses for sword and sorcery fiction ever, right? I mean, just great.
Yeah, and I'm wearing a Smolder shirt, and Sarah from Smolder just had her first story included. And yeah, that it is. You probably don't want every single band to be writing
Right.
short stories, but for the ones who have that artistic bent, it's really cool. And then you got their heavy metal sensibilities coming right into the fiction itself.
Yeah, I love it. And the thing is great is like, Dave has published like a whole bunch of stuff. Obviously the metal artists writing their own fiction, but also like published new Michael Moorcock stories, published classic uh Manly Wade Wellman stories that might have been overlooked by other people, right? Just like, wow, hey, introducing people to just some really cool stuff. And I just, and that introduced me to new bands because I had no idea who these bands are, right? There's no, I think actually in Boise we do have a metal station, but it's like mainstays, right? For the most part. And like, who are the new metal bands? Like, what's the new metal or metal that I haven't heard of? Because it exploded again around 2006. And I was completely unfamiliar.
Yeah, and the average metal band, which of course is a meaningless phrase, but the average metal band today is really good, right? Like there's so many. Um, so I'm doom metal, which is not my favorite genre, but I mean I like it, and but like there are so many good doom metal bands right now. I'll never be able to listen to them all, and a lot of them are fantasy influenced. I was just picking out, similarly, trying to grab some things, and I was thinking about things I've collected over just the last couple of years of metal bands that had put out things that are sort of in that fantasy area, right? So we've got Throne of Iron, and the CD here is called Adventure Two, right? It's very much like it. Poison Ruin, which is more like they're punk rock band. Castle. This looks like a Misfits cover, but it's more on the Doom side. They're phenomenal. Helm's Deep, right? So you didn't know where the name of the band comes from there. We've got Black Sword Thunder Attack. So there's so much metal. And then we were talking about the more direct D&D inspired ones. So the band Dungeon Crawl. So this is our
Yeah,
maze
that's
controller. You've got fight dice. Um, and again, these are completely about their Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and it doesn't all have to be. Going back a little ways, this is one of my favorite ones. Eventually I'll do a very long article on this, but the Lord Weirslaud Feg did
oh wow.
a. So this is a recent EP that expands on the Traveler record that this band did, and
Take a step back, and design on classic Traveler role playing game books
it's
translates
exactly
so
that.
well to album covers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it looks like one of the little black books so much.
Yeah,
So the original album was inspired by the main writer, his a Traveler campaign. They're a great metal band. There's offshoot bands with different band members. So if you go down the rabbit hole, there's a lot there. But to me, that that one really excites me because it's just fun when it's not D&D, right? I love D&D. It's my favorite role playing game. And it is defining D&D as loosely as you can, and but to have something that's I love it when I find something that's inspired by something other than D&D from a role-playing game, and I love it when I find a band that's something other than metal, even though metal is probably my favorite genre.
yeah, and modern metal bands are so technically proficient. They blow my mind as to just like it's funny because I often joke. There was like a Twitter thing that somebody posted the other day that was like, I guess when I say the other day, I think it's even like 6 months ago, that they said, oh, they only listen to music if it's in if it's in drop D. I'm like, because then it's heavy. I'm like, so what? Ocean Avenue by Yellow Card, because that's in drop D. Like I'm like, I think it's funny that bands like Jimmy Eat World or the pop punk bands of the early 2000s, mid 2000s, they rock harder in many ways than like metal from like the early 80s. Like I mean, I love the Scorpions, right? They're like one of my favorite bands of all time, and they do rock, but like they're nowhere near as like heavy as modern metal bands, and as skilled as they are, they're nowhere near as technically proficient as modern metal bands who just what they're able to do with their arpeggios and their solos and things like that, or time signature changes, you know, and experimenting. Right there's what's the band out of England? It's only got two members, and the drummer's called. Is it two? Is the drummer? I'm trying to remember. Gosh, I can't. They wear masks. Um, I can't believe that the
Not
name's
sure.
escaping me right now. For the wearing masks, metal band is like a lot of them right now. But oh, I'll remember later. I'll remember later. But like it's two people, and yet the technical proficiency of the music being put out is amazing. It's like getting essentially like Tom Schultz level production values from two people. You know. Uh,
Yeah, and you've had generations who are it's building on. They have access. They're learning how to play through YouTube, right? So when I was learning to play guitar, I was having there was for the songs I wanted to play, there was no you couldn't get the sheet music for it, and there certainly was there weren't tabs for that, and um, there wasn't YouTube for someone to show you how to do it. So I'm just playing the album, putting it on over and over, trying to figure out the licks. And there's value to that. I got, I think, very good ear training by having to learn how to play Blue Öyster Cult songs that way.
right.
But uh, but they're immediately learning what they want to learn and are just working on building on that technical proficiency, and things keep leveling up, right? So when from a guitar standpoint, the each generation, just from a pure technical standpoint, the artistic merits are all personal, right? but what at one point would seem highly technical. So when Ingve Malmsteen came out, it completely blew my mind. I hadn't heard anything played that fast. I hadn't heard that level. You had classical influenced lead guitar playing with Ritchie Blackmore and Randy Rhoads, but nothing that was to that level and to that level of technical proficiency. And then you hear like Dragon Force today and something, and it's even faster, right? When you said going back around heavier, heavier itself is a subjective
It's
term,
true.
right? And that part, so things get faster, they get the ease of access to distortion and to lower to drop detuning or things like that, make things sound heavier. But there's different kinds of heavy, right? Like and something like, for me, I find Dragon Force or things like that sort of a lot of symphonic metal and things like that, not heavy at all.
Right.
That the drumming's very fast but pretty grooveless. And so when you have like slower, sludgier songs, to me, that feels heavier. Again, whatever heavier doesn't mean anything, but
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think like I like that. Like for me, really, really heavy. Like I will still say that when I hear War Pigs or songs off the first Black Sabbath album, either off the first Black Sabbath album or off of Paranoia, like Paranoid, those are like, I don't think anything has been heavier than that. I mean, like, I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a parent, come home one day, and like little Timmy, he's got like the LP, and he's just like cranked War Pigs. I can't imagine what like your first reaction would be, because that doesn't sound like anything that pre-existed really outside of classical music, which most people weren't familiar with, like the tritone and things like that, right? That
yeah.
you're just being hit by this wall of sound that's in a minor key, and it's dark, and it's just drumming and thrumming. I think I'd have been worried about Timmy. What is he listening to? And when I hear those still, like, I don't think anything, you know, uh, gets heavier. It gets as heavy, but I just, like, for me, and those aren't particularly fast. Like Warpic's not a particularly fast song, but it's heavy.
No. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like different types of
Yeah,
heavy, right? Like,
right.
um, but yeah, and you asked what are good Halloween songs, and I would, you know, certainly for me, the song Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, it would be definitely on the top of my, well, I don't know, be at the top of the list, but it'd be on the list for sure, right? That one,
Sure.
and that's slow, other than you get that when it changes parts, um, but you get the tritone, you get the whatever that's called, the musical Diablo or whatever
Yeah.
that's, I forget what
Yeah.
that's called, and you get that in the main riff to it, and the for me, when Ozzy does the oh please God no part, like especially when I was listening as a kid with the headphones on in bed at night with the lights off before going to bed, like,
Man.
oh man, that definitely was like
Yeah.
watching a horror movie.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't mistake like more sophistication in like even recording techniques or ability to layer thanks to editing tools and things like that, right? Those, of course, have added new tools to the workshed, but or to the toolbox. But you know, I think that great old music is great, but when it comes to like that technical aspect, and I'm glad you mentioned it this way, right? Because I'm like I'm a huge defender of Salieri, as you know, because you read my blog. I'm like, look, Amadeus is one of the best movies ever made, right? I'm a big Milos Forman fan. I think it's tremendously well performed. There's no doubt that Mozart's, a phenomenal composer. You'd be ludicrous to assert otherwise. And the film is taking liberties that, are there for narrative purpose, which I think is fine. Uh, but Salieri was tremendously technically gifted, and you can tell that because of who his students were. Right? And his students are like Beethoven and Liszt, and you're like, wait a minute, Liszt is his student? Wait, because he's pretty, you know, that's difficult for most people to play today. And modern metal musicians have kind of their Liszt equivalent with people like Yngwie Malmsteen or Eddie Van Halen, who came in, Randy Rhoads, right, who came in, Zakk Wylde, with tremendous skill sets. And then you're coming in, not, well, maybe you and these kids with the YouTube videos, they're coming in, they just get to watch that and learn directly from that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
amazing.
been invented, right? Like, so that thing now exists. You see, kind of like when you see it's possible. You see this in sporting events too, right? Like when a barrier's been broken off, and then you'll right, like, so the sub 4 minute mile or something like that. This is not my
Right.
area of expertise, but once you get below know that that can be done, then it'll get broken against subsequently. So once you see someone playing like Eddie Van Halen, then you know that that's possible. That there's something that can be emulated. They learn that, and then they take it to whatever they want to direction that they want to further that to, or same with Ingve, right? So it does kind of keep growing off of that.
Skating the 900 or whatever, right? That was once impossible, and people do that fairly regularly now. I mean,
Right,
it's
right.
common, but you know, yeah, the kinds of ways that people are inspired and push themselves, and now I do think that happens a lot with music, and I do think that people are trying to do that with role playing games, which is why they sometimes do new things. Although, and now I'm going to bring it back to Dungeon Crawl Classics, since you wrote a supplement for that, right? One of the things I love about Dungeon Crawl Classics is I had a professor early in my days named Martin Johnson. He taught at UC Riverside. He was a great professor. I had hoped he was going to be on my dissertation committee, but he moved to Louisiana State, which is where his family's from, Louisiana. His best friend, who's also a professor, was in Louisiana at the time. So he's like, I'm going to family and friends and to a great school, right? To an endowed chair at the time.
Mm.
But he sadly passed away within a couple of years of going there, far too young. But when he was my professor, he said, if you want to do cutting edge political science, right, what you want to do is you want to read the stuff from like the 1920s and 30s. And then you want to see if you can replicate it today using modern techniques and modern research tools to either validate it or critique it and expand on it, because they were thinking big ideas at the time. And we now have tools to analyze those big ideas that they didn't have.
Interesting.
Because, like, with some of them, they were doing like very sophisticated statistical math by hand because they don't have computers to do the calculations, right? So and even stuff from the 1950s, I remember reading about the one of the people from the Michigan school hauling the cards, and they're literally cards. I don't know why I did quotation marks there. The cards that you used to have to program computers with, that I've only seen in That Touch of Mink, but that existed. And he's got
IBM punch cards.
Yeah, he's got punch cards filling buckets, and he's hauling them to go to the computer because he's got his time, and he like trips and like they spill out, and then he has to like go back to the place with the sorter or whatever it is to resort the cards. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like very, we don't have to do that kind of thing. I get mad when I have a typo in the code that I'm writing, and it crashes and spends, I was working on my dissertation last weekend, and I'd run some stuff, some analysis, and normally when you close R, you don't want to save the environment because that just takes up RAM the next time you load up. But I said no, I didn't want to save, except it was asking me if I wanted to save all the code I'd just written that I hadn't saved yet. And I was like, oh my God. But thankfully, my output was there. So I just copied and pasted my output and re-edited that and got it to work again. But that was like a half an hour. I can't imagine what it would have been like with the cards. But the same goes for like role-playing games, right? So you've got Goodman Games. They said, well, D&D has moved through the cycle where now it's D&D fiction that it's emulating, not old Appendix N fiction. What would a game today look like based on Appendix N?
Right, right. And I got exposed to Dungeon Crawl Classics because I had seen that their Lankmar game had come out, and being a fan of the fictions, and oh, that sounds good. And I saw that you needed the Dungeon Crawl Classics to play it, and I had seen it and flipped through it in stores, and like how some bands you have to see live to really get it. I think for me, when I flipped through DCC, and it was a very big book, and the funnel didn't necessarily, yeah, I don't know that sounds how I would want to play, and flipping through, like I don't know, and then I tried it, and it was like seeing a band that you have to see live for them to close you. I think DCC, it's a fun book to read because it's got a lot of old school influenced art, but it plays better than it reads, and that's what turned me on to playing DCC, and it's just a lot of fun, and the DCC community is pretty special. So where there's places, it's very welcoming. When I uh, uh, started to play, and then also then trying to release my own stuff, everyone was so welcoming, and it's they're developing young fans as well. I've played a lot with my kids, Dungeon Crawl Classic, so it's been a good fit. So it's the game that I play the most, or it's related games these days.
Yeah, the thing I think is really interesting about role-playing game communities is even the ones that seem the most curmudgeon-y from the outside, once you're inside them, they're all super friendly within the group. That even as they're maybe more antagonistic to people outside the group, just because they're trying to like define their space, right? They're saying we matter too. Once you're in those groups, but I think there are a couple that stand out as just like super nice, and DCC and Savage Worlds are two that just stand out as like, yeah, we're just nice people who are happy to be here. Tiny D6 that way too.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's great. It makes a difference, right? You talked about how what you wanting to do with your Substack and doing these kind of things to create a community, and the community aspects of role playing games is so important because you you need to play with people. Although I mean, solo gaming's fun too, but
It
ultimately
is.
the a lot of the magic that, like we were talking about before, that I've experienced was because I was playing with other humans. And uh, when we get to our later stages of our lives, where you're not meeting new people like you are when you're a kid all the time, and have a way to meet new people. I'm so excited that we're getting to meet through this, right? And I'm getting through role playing games and the internet and the communities around them. I've gotten to have new friends as an adult that are all over the world that I otherwise wouldn't have met. So the community part of role playing games, I think, is especially important. And so for the gaming communities that are the most open and inclusive, and welcoming to new members, that certainly appeals to me, and it was one of the things I loved about DCC.
Yeah, and the thing about like DCC, right? You mentioned reading through the book and seeing like maybe the funnel isn't for you, and you know it's interesting because you could play a funnel, and I think that they're fun, right? To play funnels, but post funnel DCC is actually like, and once again, like you've entered a new game again. That's different again,
That's right.
and uh, is more heroic. It's not quite mudcore as some people might call it.
Yeah, definitely not. And some people have, you know, I've seen criticisms that it's like DCC is not for campaign play, but you know, I've had long campaigns with it. It works really well. The whole sort of, you don't need a rule for it if they want to do something quest for it approach lends itself really well to campaign play, and the character, you know, having the luck mechanic. I think it's a way for players to signal what's important to them and to their character, and that as a judge or a DM, a GM is great, right? Like if I understand what's important, then it lets me um, create challenges and encounters and characters that'll be of interest, right? And they're more likely to
Yeah.
take your bait.
Well, I mean, that's it, right? Is there are dials like, yes, you can play it super lethal all the time if you want, though that can be very frustrating to players from time to time, right? I made the mistake when I was introducing uh, basic D&D BX, right? Mulvey Cook Marsh D&D to a group of younger gamers who we were playing fourth edition at the time. They was doing the the encounters at the local game store. I was game mastering
Oh,
that, and
nice.
had a great group of young people. I'm like, oh yeah, and I want to introduce you to D and to early D&D, and we'll play it in my house, blah blah. And a guy made a magic user, right? Magic users have D4 hit points. He had 4. I mean, there's no way I wasn't going to give him maximum hit points because
Sure.
the early game can be so lethal potentially. And in the first encounter, right, I was like, oh, I fully expected him to understand how vulnerable the magic user was and to like hide. That did not happen. Everybody else hid except for him. So the fighters in plate mail, which you can actually afford in basic D&D, so they're actually like pretty stable, tough characters, much tougher than a wizard. They're hiding behind rocks as like this very small band, like 4 people, come and threaten the party, and he ends up getting shot with an arrow in like the first 10 minutes of play. And of course,
Oh,
yeah, it did more than 4 points. It did 4 points of damage. So he's just like dead. And I'm like, oh God, and he's just like mad, right? He's just hurt. Because it's, there are no, in traditional, like basic expert D&D, there's no, you're merely unconscious, except if the DM says you're merely
right.
unconscious. There's no rule for that. You're just dead. And he's like, really? I'm like, well, let's step back. I mean, I'm not gonna be. He's like, but it ended up like it took a few minutes to de-escalate the
Sure.
genuine hurt. Right? I'm not saying the person acted uh, out of turn. They were actually hurt by the experience. They just hadn't had anything, and there was no amount of setup that I could have done. For this person, other people, I think they bought in and they were thinking of it more as a funnel thing, but this particular player wasn't in funnel mentality yet, because
Yeah.
basic D&D, once you hit like second or third level, well, then you're more stable again. But first level is very vulnerable in that game, and without training wheels or whatever, I don't like without protections from the DM. So, uh, that was a big learning experience for me too, because I ended up doing for this player, who I still played with and am still great friends with years after this event, but never played basic D&D with this
With
person. But I ended up giving them an experience first similar to my first D&D experience, which was not great, except in his case, he just didn't like the rules for the early game, rather
right.
than for some.
I,
So
I think that's one of the magic things about the funnel for DCC is that one, you're not spending any time making characters, and you don't spend as much time on an older version of D&D than you would with a 5th edition character. And the 5th edition characters are going to be more robust at first level, so I think that's reasonable, right? But with DCC, if you do start with the funnel, right, so you've got your 4 characters, and then you can't be really precious about any of them, and you kind of get into it's easier to get into that mindset when you're running 4 characters, so you're not um, expecting it to be any different. and you play. You are really and the funnels, a lot of the Goodman Games written funnels, right? You're not fighting an orc, right? You're dealing with these, cataclysmic entities and things
Yes.
like that and events. And so the players come out of that with such healthy respect for the players you have, for the characters who survive. The players are appreciative, and they have like the natural fear of in that very dangerous world. And then they get powerful quite quick in DCC, but that fear never goes away. It's a swingy game, and
Right.
so they in practicalities very they can spell burn and spend luck and get some do unto others as they were done unto in the funnel, and but the fear never goes away, so it's perfect, right? Like we don't have that much character depth once we get out of the funnel. In my experience, when we're playing, there's definitely some, but it's not that much. But the fear is there, and it makes it fun.
Yeah, and like for me, well, like fifth edition, and this was true of fourth edition too, right? It was a big, like third edition was D&D GURPS, and I don't mean that pejoratively. It just is. There's a mechanic for everything. That was what was popular in the late '90s, were the build your own character, have a rule for everything games. We hadn't yet moved back to simpler games being preferred again yet.
Right.
But it's a very structured game. Fourth edition comes out. It's very heroic minded, being inspired by massive multiplayer online RPGs and by Magic the Gathering, right? Because you use a lot of keywords and stuff like that, and the interactions. I guess it's meant to simulate computer role-playing games at the same time that it's accessible rules-wise to those who played card games. And then fifth edition comes out and it simplifies the rule set, like at least in the core rule books, simplifies the rule set, keeping the tactical stuff but disguising it, like making it not too many grids and having much better layout and writing. Fourth edition's biggest problem is it reads like a technical manual more than like a normal role-playing book. I actually think they peaked with the Essentials books, which I think are actually very good. But fifth edition, they're not quite super like street level superheroics, but I've never felt uncomfortable with that because my favorite role-playing games to run have historically been superhero role-playing games, right? My all-time favorite game is DC Heroes. So like for me, I'm getting to play the kind of game I want to play anyway. I'm just doing it in a fantasy setting instead of Los Angeles, which is where I would have historically set my superhero game. Although now that I live in Boise, maybe I would set it here.
Oh yeah, for superhero games, anything modern, right? You want to go with what you know. Since people can kind of compare it to something that exists rather than your completely made up fantasy world.
Yeah, although maybe if I was doing Boise, maybe I should do a horror game like Call of Cthulhu or something, and just like skinwalkers and Sasquatches and cults.
Yeah.
Just
Can you hear me, Christian? I lost you.
Now they turned my microphone off.
I was gonna say, I think I lost you for a moment. Yep, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Wow. That's high technical stuff. I should have done that when the Amazon speaker was telling me what the weather was going to be.
I heard that.
Yeah. So will everybody else.
That's what makes it genuine.
Yeah, that's right. It's how you know we're not AI generated.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. We've proven we're human.
Yeah.
Plus, what other
hey,
mistakes I've made.
I could talk with you for like a couple more hours, but like this is already going to be like I think like a two gig file to edit or whatever with the two video streams coming in. But it's been great chatting with you, Matt. And I look forward to talking to you another time, and we'll talk about maybe some particular subject. But thanks for stopping by for the Geek Chat. And I'll see you next time.
Yeah, sounds good. I would love to do it again. I had a blast. Thanks, Christian.
Started out with a blog and a mic, talking RPGs and Friday night fights. Double tap to play, roll for your fate. Geek Karate's back and the takes are great.